Welcome. I would like to start today's event with sharing WIA's land acknowledgement. WIA has a global team around the world. However, WIA's home base is located in what is currently known as Berkeley, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, but what is also known as Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. And I want to thank our Ohlone relatives for allowing us to call this place home. WIA recognizes that these are stolen lands, and we as an organization and as community members have a responsibility to do all that we can to be good guests of this land. And while land acknowledgements are an important first step, they must always be followed up with action. In Huichin, we take action by naming the ongoing and normalized colonization of indigenous lands, by speaking the original name of this land, and by collaborating with local Ohlone leaders, such as Karina Gould, who is in this picture, and through paying our Shumi land tax, which supports our colleagues at the Segorite Land Trust as they do the important work of rematriating their lands. We do this because we collectively as an alliance envision a future that's not only thriving and sustainable, but just. In the chat, we will include information on where and how we pay Shumi, and hopefully invite you to think of ways to take action today. And if you're wanting to share ways that you take action in acknowledging the original peoples of the lands where you stand, feel free to share in the chat any other resources or strategies that you are implementing. So with that, for those who are new to WIA, I would love to share a little more context on who we are as an organization. WIA recognizes that women leading environmental action are underserved in every way. Therefore, WIA's key strategy is to leverage the power of an alliance to mobilize resources and utilize collective action and collaboration to alleviate burdens and barriers placed on grassroots women leaders. In a moment, I will share an animation that we created in order to illustrate our theory of change. But before that, I want to see in the chat if there's any reactions or anything that was shared. Oh, I see that some leaders from our collaborators in Mexico are here. Welcome. And yeah, Kia shared the Shumi land tax in the chat. Feel free to continue popping in any comments or question as we move forward. But now I would be so happy and honored to play WIA's animation video. And while you're watching this animation, I invite you to write in the chat something that you are observing or that you're getting from this animation as you are reacting and learning from it. you can see in the video and the animation that this woman is carrying these seeds with so much pride. And in the same way, I see a lot of WIA leaders carrying seeds with the same pride. And I'm so excited to introduce you to today's speakers, because I really know that they exemplify the open doors for a lot of women. And those women who are bringing forth their seeds and bringing forth their solutions are now getting open doors because of organizations like Fondo Semillas, who we are so excited to be in partnership with. And, as some of you know, this year in the US and US territories, we have a group of 26 leaders working on a number of critical issues. Through their initiatives and eco-enterprises, they are solving some of their community's most pressing issues, such as boosting their regional economies, working for land rematriation and access, food sovereignty, reproductive justice, protecting traditional life ways, working on autonomous health, and more. We welcome these leaders with so much respect for their work. And we are joining these leaders as they go through WIA's 2023 Regenerative Agriculture and Health Accelerator. You are invited to learn more about these leaders and their work by visiting our website. We're going to share some information on the chat about. And like our speakers today, these leaders are modeling the WIA way. They're the embodied truth that when women thrive, the earth thrives. And in today's event, we will get a chance to hear from leaders at Fondo Semillas on their vision for an abundant feminist philanthropy, who are our partners in Mexico, like I've mentioned. And we are very excited to share with you that we are going to be going even more deeply with this partnership in the coming years to continue making space for leaders in Mexico alongside Fondo Semillas. And so we're going to be weaving our alliance building efforts, and this is kind of a first step in that effort to weave in tighter and invite them to be our first speakers for Ripple Week. And for those that you are new to Fondo Semillas, they are the first feminist fund in Mexico that is truly leading in revolutionizing the way funds are being mobilized to respond to communities by empowering women and intersex people. It is no secret that mobilizing resources, fundraising, and funding are some of the most difficult barriers women face while doing the essential work that is needed in their communities. At WIA, we have deep respect for Fondo Semillas and the work that they're doing and how they're leading this body of work, while also promoting a dignified activism and creating changes in the philanthropic community. Today, we are joined by Alejandra and Jessica. Alejandra Navarro serves as Fondo Semillas corporate partnership and resource mobilization leader. Ale studied communications at the Universidad de las Américas in Puebla and has a master's degree in social responsibility from the Universidad Anáhuac. She has worked on issues such as disability, early childhood education, and social disasters in NGOs and corporate foundations. Thank you so much, Ale, for being here. We're so excited to learn a little bit more about your work at Fondo Semillas. And Jessica Anaya is Fondo Semillas Resource Mobilization Coordinator. Jessica has a degree in communication from the Universidad de Valle de México. She has collaborated in national and international organizations such as World Visions and Oxfam Mexico, and has experience in children's right and well-being, humanitarian response, inequality, and gender. Jessica has more than 15 years of experience carrying out actions for the procurement of funds for social impact. I'm excited to introduce you to today's speakers and hand it off to them for a presentation they have prepared for us. So without further ado, Jessica and Alejandra, please take it away.
Thanks, Dani. Let me just share my screen really quickly. Yeah, there we go. So thank you, Dani and the WEA team for the space. I'm gonna leave just to start this really cool presentation we brought for you today.
Thank you, Ale and Dani, for considering us and having us this afternoon. The majority of people will have to access interpretation. I feel more comfortable in Spanish. We're very happy to be with you all because we already talked about why it's so important to do philanthropy in terms of gender and how we live it in the communities in Mexico. We want to start with a macro thing, and we're going to be telling you what is that Fondo Semillas do with communities and organizations in Mexico. And we're going to be talking about what philanthropy is for Fondo Semillas, what is that we're talking about globally, and how we working in a context in Mexico. As you know, it's a context with violence where women are most vulnerable. And I'm going to be starting to talk about what is the Fund of Women. We're a global network in Mexico, and the Women's Funds put in the center of our work everything that Fondo Semillas does, all the supports that we will learn about have that mission to put the needs, the rights of women in the center of our work. And who do we support? We say women, but it's really includes women, trans people, intersex people. And we were talking about building philanthropy with gender-based philanthropy, but we also want to give you some examples of that. For instance, if there's an environment crisis or if there's a natural disaster, an emergency, it's not the same when we act in an emergency, when you have a gender perspective, when you're reconstructing to put the needs of women first, of young girls and teenager girls. That's what we do. Our mission as a fund and Fund of Women is to reach out to base organizations, those small organizations that are made up by 5 to 10 people that are organized. And of course, the support can get to mixed organizations, but our mission is that the organizations are led by women and that the decision making is led by women. They know what the problematic is in their communities and they know how to bring solutions to their community. We not only give financial solutions, but a very innovative thing that we have is to give 100% flexible resources. And that means that it's a resource that women organization can use to any need that they have found to resolve an issue. It could be paying their electrical bill, maintenance, rent of a space, for instance, like a shelter for immigrants. So with that resource, they pay rent or any other thing. And when we say that it's 100% flexible, I thought someone was speaking. When we say that it's 100% flexible, that's our logic. But we also motivate activists and people that are in the front lines of the organizations, those women that work in the communities, have the right to have a dignified salary. Many of the times, the leaders of the organizations, these activists, were not born thinking that they were going to be activists. Unfortunately, there was an event in their lives, like the loss of a family member or any violence that they face, makes them activists. But these women have other jobs during the day, and they need to bring money for their families. So when we tell them that the resource is flexible, we tell them that it's fair and flexible according to their salary. And I was telling you that we're a global network, international network, and we work with many of the funds aligned. Even though we say it's for Mexican women, we have networking alliances outside of the country. Now I'm going to pass it to Alejandra so that she can tell you what we do.
So thanks, Jess. So as Dani was saying a while ago, we are the first feminist fund, and maybe the only feminist fund that exists in Mexico. And our dream is that every woman, every trans person, every girl has what they need to have the best life possible. We deeply believe in the transformative power of organized girls, women, trans, and intersex people, and we are here to support them in several ways. We are turning 33 years old this year, which is not like we were born yesterday. And we have been mobilizing resources and providing them to organizations, groups of women, networks, collectives. And then we don't just give out the money and say, see you next funding cycle. We accompany them throughout the whole cycle to help them strengthen their projects. We introduce them to other key actors within the scope. We've come to learn that sometimes it doesn't matter if they don't work on the same topic. If they're in the same region, they probably want to collaborate, or it doesn't matter if they don't work in the same region. If they work on the same topic, they might want to collaborate, and that helps move their work forward in a stronger way. We also focus on grassroots organizations which have really little margin for funding with the Mexican fiscal scope. So for most of them, Fondo Semillas is the only opportunity they have to have money and resources to continue their project and to keep growing. Really quickly, I would like to mention, because this is something that only we do, is our selection process. We open an open call every 18 months. And then all of the organizations, groups, collectives that want to join register on our Google Forms. It's really simple. And then we only ask for 3 things. We ask for them to not be affiliated to any political party or religious institution, because we don't want the funds to be taken aback that way. They need to be led by women, in this same idea that we need a shift of power and that women know what we need. It can be women, it could be trans people, it could be intersex people. And then the third is that they've been working for over a year just to ensure that this is not new and they already have something going on and can guarantee that they're going to keep moving forward with these topics and they know how to do so. So we cross all topics on women's rights, but just to have a little bit of order, we organize them by programs. So our first program is called Body, that basically is all things health, violence prevention, violence attention. We see terrible stuff like feminicide, and stuff like that. What we want to do is strengthen the work of the organizations that defend the right to decide on one's own life and body. And we want to guarantee that everybody has access to health and physical and emotional integrity, not just talking about violence, not just physical violence, but all types of violence. So I wanted to bring a couple of examples of organizations we are able to collaborate with. So in this program, we have Más Sueños, we have Comando Colibrí, and we have El Taller that work violence prevention in vulnerable communities through sports. Más Sueños does it with soccer. Comando Colibrí does it with boxing and martial arts, and El Taller does it with biking and theater and several other activities, just so that they can reach the women with some sort of an excuse, and it's easier for them to open up and come to these programs. Then we have land. Land is land defense against extractivism and these big companies that come and put their factory there and forget that there are actually people who own that land and live there. And we have organizations that are also seeking to combat climate change, either by making out new technologies or by coming back to ancient knowledge and practices from many, many years ago that tend to be more sustainable to land. And then finally, we have women fighting for the right to own their own land. It seems ridiculous that in 2023, there are still women that produce and work the land, and then they don't have the right to be able to have a property title and have it be formally theirs. And that puts them really at risk. So a couple of organizations we're supporting this cycle in this program is Mujeres de la Tierra, which I think are actually online here today, I was told. If you are, shout out to you guys. They're awesome. They work in Palta, which is south of Mexico City, and they do everything, all things corn, I like to say. But they also defend their own land and economically empower women to have their own businesses and to have their own products and to sustain themselves, basically. And then we have Unión de Pueblos de Morelos that does something similar. They share knowledge for working the fields. Some do cactus, some do corn, some do other types of products, and then they all come together and build their own autonomous market. So I think that's pretty cool as well. Then we have work, which does all things labor rights. The idea is that we get to organize women and support organized women that are fighting for their rights in textile factories, domestic workers, sex workers, everything that has to do with labor rights and their recognition, as well as the recognition of unpaid work, because still this year, women do twice as unpaid work as men do. So women tend, and it's their responsibility, and check it out, I'm quoting because it's not, to go out into the world and work and sustain themselves in the economic system, but then come home and take care of the household and the kids and sometimes the spouse or their parents. And that makes women burn out. Doing everything alone makes women burn out, and it's not recognized. So here we have the Alianza Mexicana de Trabajadoras Sexuales and the Red de Mujeres Sindicalistas, which work for towards labor rights for sex workers and for textile factory workers, the second one. Then we have Identities, which is basically groups of women, trans people, and intersex people who want to be recognized, have their rights recognized for who they are. So we have a lot of trans women alliances, or we have a lot of LGBT people, Afro-Mexican people, indigenous groups in this program. So we have Red de Juventudes Trans de México, which is trans youth, which is often not recognized and often looked over. And we have Brújula Intersexual, which are intersex people that are about 1% of intersex people worldwide, which is not a small percentage if you consider the world's population. And nobody ever talks about intersex rights. So we're working to change that and supporting them to be able to change that. So as I said, we've been working for 33 years, and in these 33 years, we've been able to support more than 600 organizations with more than 1,000 grants, which translates directly into a little bit more than 1 million women directly, and almost 5 million people that have been benefited indirectly. Our main beneficiaries are the organizations, but they reach out, and their work reaches out to a bunch of people in their communities, and when they work together, the reach is even larger. So I'm gonna let Jess talk to you about why we are here and what feminist philanthropy is for us.
We asked Ale to provide the big picture context of the programs at Fondo Semillas so that we could really get to the heart of what we're going to tell you in this presentation. We have been in existence for 33 years, and in the last 5 years, we opened up our funds procuration processes, and especially at the international level, because in Mexico, we did not have the possibility to obtain resources. And the resources we had at that point in Fondo Semillas came from big international organizations and other countries. And so we made an attempt to open up our strategies because Mexico has a lot of resources. And if we have this strategy, it's supposed to benefit Mexican women. And we were worried, honestly, to open up something that was going to be open to the private sector, which has committed fraud and different workers' rights violations. And really, there aren't a lot of funds at the global level that have these strategies that Fondo Semillas has. And so we began to get some businesses on our side, but we saw that there was a big gap between the philanthropy that was being done by companies in Mexico versus philanthropy at the global level. That is, at the global level, there were much more progressive practices in terms of how to deliver funds to organizations. It was much more flexible. We were able to get resources to organizations in a flexible way. And when we knocked on the door of local markets, not Mexican companies, but the majority are multinationals or transnational companies that have their headquarters in Mexico. And this, for example, put a lot of restrictions on the resources. Say they would give us $10, they would say, okay, $1 you can send on salaries, 2% on infrastructure. And so we saw that more and more there were restrictions on how the funds could be spent. They would say, we'll give you this amount of resources and you must spend it within 1 year. And so we saw there were lots of gaps in terms of Mexican philanthropy. And feminist philanthropy really is not a concept that was born at Fondo Semillas, but rather at the international level. And we have we've created a definition of what feminist philanthropy is for Fondo Semillas. Over the 5 years, we've tried to close the gap by making a strong connection with different entities, asking them what works for feminist philanthropy in Mexico. And we've been able to talk to different groups and support groups of women with disappeared children. This is something that really affects all of us in Mexico, enforced disappearance. And so perhaps this would be somebody who worked at a company or at a school, something like that. And they might become an activist in trying to resolve the situation of their loved one who was disappeared. And so these women sometimes don't realize that there are other people who are going through the same problems. And it might be 12 hours away in the field, someone digging around with a hoe or a rake looking for the remains of their family member. And so we could not force these women's groups to travel, to do reports. And what kind of time would they have to do those things? Many times they would say, we want a quarterly report and we want the organizations to have lots of time for workshops and things. And so this kind of philanthropy was not putting the needs of the women in the local groups at the heart of what they do. And we really decided that we needed to do that advocacy and find out, what do women need? What do the groups need? They need the trust of funders. And when we get flexible funding, they feel more trusted. They feel trusted that they're going to be the repository of the resources and they are going to be empowered to use them the way that they know they need to. And we do have to have transparency and accountability, so we do have to do reporting. But we have to look at how to do this in the most simple way possible, even sometimes by phone calls or visits, not just these long, written, formal quarterly reports. Sometimes women cannot do these. And so we began to do something that really made a lot of sense for us, and in particular with feminist philanthropy, that really centers women and their needs. We need to continue delivering flexible funds so that women can decide where they put those resources. These are women who have identified the problems and the solutions. And with flexible funds, they often were not available at the local level. Companies would come and say, we had funding for 1 year. And it's not like these groups just start working when Fondo Semillas give them money. Many of them have been working for many years, as I was saying. Oftentimes people go through terrible things and they turn into activists. And they begin just meeting on the patio at their home, they're traveling, and they're organizing with their own resources. So we need to give them a little more certainty about how the resources we give them point towards sustainability for them. And we can deliver multi-year funding for them, sometimes 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years. We like to guarantee that amount of resources. And that way they have the certainty that they were going to be able to continue counting on those funds to carry out their activities. And again, putting trust at the center. We deliver the resources and women decide how they will use them. And finally, and very importantly, we try to create horizontal relationships with donors. Whenever there is a delivery of money, there is a relationship of power. We know it because we are also donors in these organizations. And every time we get to know them more and more. And we see that we want relationships to be horizontal. These relationships of power cannot be distinguished. The organizations really are the ones who are carrying out the projects. And so you provide your resources and your trust, but we also provide the accompaniment and the strengthening. But the women, they put the work forward. They need the resources. And so we start with that level of trust and we say, we've got to be peers. We've got to have strong and broad links so that we can bring small organizations into the feminist movement in general. Why is it important to talk about feminist philanthropy? We have identified, for example, as Alejandra was saying, we've got the organizations that are working in different programs, but talking with them, participating in research. And we've been in Mexico for 33 years, and we've seen that there are issues that still aren't getting funding. There are tangible things that can't be measured. For example, care work that continues to fall disproportionately on the shoulders of women. If there's someone sick at home, we know it's women who are going to be accompanying them and providing the care work. How do we put justice, and we're talking a lot about justice, climate justice and gender justice today, restorative justice, economic justice. And a lot of people don't understand those things, and nobody's financing them. And a lot of people are not financing the work that has to do with the care of activists themselves. Sometimes they work 20-hour days, and there is a lot of stress on their minds and bodies. And these are things that are intangible. They cannot be measured, like just solidarity and also collective care, and how these women may have to create healing circles and talk about strategies for how to mitigate the impacts and all of the pain that they face. And we really have to look at what women's needs are and where the opportunities to finance them are. And these days, these are things that we want to finance things that people are not daring to finance at all these days. And I will close with this. Unfortunately, only 1% of resources at the global level are donated to social causes that go to gender equality. And so to really see these statistics, it makes us know that we have to knock on doors in a different way, not just talking about health or climate change, always with a gender perspective, but when we think about the resources that exist at the global level, we need to create alliances with other types of organizations and causes, for example, reproductive justice. Many donors are putting funds in those areas to bring about a more just society. That's it, Ale.
That is it. So we currently find there are always challenges and opportunities. So as I said before, when I told you we fund grassroots organizations and that Fondo Semillas is sometimes the only way they can access resources, this is because current financial structures don't offer these conditions that just mentioned, and they don't offer the conditions needed to fund them. If they're not legally constituted, if they don't have a donation authorization, they can't access to major funders. And this is a problem because this is how the organizations go under. And it's expensive to get a notary public and get constituted and then do the whole thing with the Mexican government where you get the authorization to receive donations, and then you have to maintain it because once a year they come and audit you and you have to submit some transparency documents and invoices and expenses, and it's expensive. So most of them don't have the structure, most of them don't have the knowledge, most of them, some of them are just starting out. So to get access to have the money to continue working becomes really complicated. And then to maintain the necessary approvals to keep going is a ton of work, and it's expensive. So organizations don't have the chance to grow, they don't have the chance to keep on doing what they're doing, and most of them just go under because of these financial structures. Then we come across traditional philanthropy practices where everything is very vertical. Donors hold all the power, and then they need what Jess just said, like numbers and impact and huge results where sometimes it can't be measured in the short term. So they'll come and ask for, what are your results this year, to women who are looking for their families, or to organizations that are treating violence or that are defending their land. What do you mean, what are my results this year? Like, do you want to know how many kilometers of land I protected? It becomes kind of absurd to be asked these results, but without them, you can't access funding, and you can't get renovations, and you can't keep going because you don't have the resources to do so. So that's a huge challenge organizations face in funders wanting immediate results and not movement construction and not long-term change in society. Resources and grants are restricted to certain ways of spending. So I think it's normal and very romantic to want every penny to go to the actual project, to the person you helped, to the woman that went to therapy, or the women that got help with their company because labor laws were not being respected, or to health services that the women get access to. It's really, really romantic, and I totally get why people want the last penny to go there. But it's also very unrealistic, because the people that work in the organizations also have rents to pay. They also eat 3 times a day, preferably. They have families to support, and they have needs to be able to just do the work. They need maybe an office space, or maybe they need computers, or maybe they need tools, or I don't know, whatever they need. And that costs money. So when donors come up to these organizations and say, you only have 5% of the grant to spend for salaries, or you only have 10% of the grant to spend on materials and transportation or administrative costs or rent for the office or whatever, it really limits what they can do and how they can move. And it really burns out the people that are working in the organizations, because they don't get to allocate money into their salaries. They don't get to have dignified working conditions. They don't get to get everything they need to keep doing the work at the quality that they're expected to do the work. So this is, I kind of understand why this happens, but it's really, really unrealistic, and it should not be happening anymore. Donors should be able to trust the people that are on the ground doing the work to spend the money however way they need to spend the money. Because sometimes organizations need to pivot and need to make changes and need to move around, and not having the ability to do so really hurts the type of work that they can do. And donors keep seeking to fulfill their agendas and push their topics that are not necessarily aligned to what the context or the movement needs. We see this all the time, especially with corporate donors, which is my specialty. They have an agenda. They want their social responsibility programs to align with the core of their business, and I totally get that. But sometimes what they want is not what the women need. And sometimes what they want to do is not what is needed in the context. So we are very appreciative of people wanting to collaborate, but if they can help us build what is needed in the context, it's just becomes kind of absurd, and the work loses a lot of meaning. and we don't move forward as we should. And then you have organizations struggling to sort of put their programs or their work in a box just to fit that funding, and it's just a recipe for disaster. And then not everything is bad. We also have opportunities. And within these opportunities, we have the creation of spaces with key actors to bring visibility to these topics. It's really important to have these spaces like the one Wea is creating today, to be able to talk about these things that everybody is going through. And it's kind of taboo to talk about because we should just be appreciative of what they are offering us. But it really stumps the progress of the work when we're working in such a restricted manner. The global tendency to move forward towards more progressive practices. We are seeing slowly but surely throughout the world that these practices are changing, that there's a lot of research now on flexible funding, and there's a lot of pushback from the organizations to have flexible funding or to have kind of flexible funding or to sort of walk towards that space. And I think it's really positive to be able to have results in research, in numbers, in the language that funders and corporate donors and even individual donors can understand and can actually make sense in their heads, and not look to the organizations like we are crazy. So I think it's really positive that we're moving towards these progressive practices. And then the possibility to build deep, trusting relationships through accountability and transparency. What a lot of people don't understand is that flexible funding does not mean non-accountable funding. It does not mean it's not transparent. It does not mean we don't give out results. It doesn't mean we can't show progress. So in these trust-based relationships, we have the possibility to show everything that we're doing, to show the work that has been taking place, to show how we're spending the money and that we're spending it correctly, that we're not spending it on fancy cars or vacation or, I don't know, something weird like that. I don't know what the hesitance is, but that we're not spending it on that and we're actually spending it on the work. So it's easier to have these open conversation, and it's easier to be able to have this flexible funding if the funder or if the donor is open to talking about what the women need and what they can provide in return of the grants and the money that is being given to them. So I think that's really cool to be able to build deeper partnerships within organizations, but also with funders and donors. So in conclusion, funding with a gender perspective means acknowledging and supporting other activities that women culturally fall, and not only the traditional projects. What Jess was saying, we have care labor tasks and we have other things, collective care and healing and solidarity and sorority. That also plays a large part of the work that we do. So funding with a gender perspective means we get to fund these activities as well. It means we get to fund and acknowledge everything else that is going on besides the project that is often really cool as well. So I think it's really important that we keep this in mind, that the project is important, but it's not the only thing happening. And then having these open communications with donors and funders on these topics is really necessary. The pushback that the organizations are having and that we as a fund are having as well is really, really necessary, because how else are the funders going to know that this is what we need? How else are we going to get the arguments and the data we need to show them that this actually works? So it's really, really important to have this pushback and to have these spaces when we can actually talk about it. And of course, flexible funding equals abundance, as the presentation is called. I know money is important, and it doesn't mean that flexible funding is going to make us all billionaires, which would be pretty cool to have a lot of spare money and just swimming around in our bank accounts. But it's not just about the money. It's also about the relationships and the trust and the communication and working from a space where you know you're safe, where you know somebody is going to catch you, where you know you've made these strong, deep relationships that if you need something, somebody's going to raise their hand. So for us, abundance is not just what we can procure from a resource mobilization perspective. It's also about everything that we can build around and that helps our work and that helps the activists' well-being and that helps the progress of the movement and not just of a specific project.
Thank you, Ale. Just one more thing before we close. I saw a question in the chat, and we're actually going to have a section for questions and answers. They were asking how they can contact us, and actually here's our information. We're going to be telling you more about it later, but in the challenges, I think we need to add, and it's actually the most important thing, is the challenge of finding financing for these groups. I was telling you that there are many topics for which we cannot get funding. Ale was saying that for these organizations to have access, we open a process every 2 years. And in this last process 2 years ago, we got applications for more than 800 organizations. Our team tries to find this financing, and when the organizations apply and register, we start giving away the money, and we're financing 170 groups, and we have been doing it in the last 2 years of the last cycle. And we have organizations that we work with in all the states in the Republic of Mexico. So that means that there are hundreds of organizations that didn't get any financing, and this team of Fondo Semillas mobilizes $5 million a year. In this cycle, we're able to finance 170 organizations, but we are still missing a lot of resources to help all these other groups. And we are looking for alliances and donors, but not any donors, because we want resources that are aligned with the vision that we have as a fund to support this movement. So if you know of an institution, organization, or you as individuals, if you want to donate, we're in all the media, in the social media, in Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and our website, which is semillas.org.mx. We get donations of individuals. We have our website in English. You can make the donations from anywhere in the world. So we invite you to follow us. We hope that we can answer all the questions as in a good way.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Ale, for this wonderful presentation and introduction into your world. I was able to attend the Feminist Philanthropy Forum earlier this year, and there was so much deep dive into these topics of the importance of flexible financing, the importance of that vision of a dignified activism, of infusing the care economy and everything that surrounds the labor of an activist. And I personally learned so much from you and your team, and I'm so looking forward to our mutual work together in Mexico. And I'm waiting to see if there's a question in the chat, but I do have a preemptive question just in case. The question that I have for you is, what advice would you give a potential grantee who is preparing to mobilize resources? We work with a lot of women who fit the profile of what you've shared, that they're doing this activism on the side of another job, and they're starting to mobilize resources. They're also taking care of their families. And as you know, there's so many barriers in that space. And sometimes when we find funding, we'll just take whatever funding is available. And it becomes this weird roller coaster ride of like, do I change what I do? How do I track my impact? How do I share this with the donors? How do I keep them long-term? And so I know that you as Fondo Semilla stand firm in your feminist philanthropy framework. And I guess, what advice would you have for a potential grantee that is seeking to adopt their own framework and to really work with donors to meet them where they're at?
Yeah, thank you, Dani. That's a question that we get from many organizations, and I'm gonna try to answer this for small organizations. One of the biggest challenges is the financing, and in this context of violence, the last thing organizations think about is the mobilization of funds. Many of them, they don't even have a structure. Maybe it's just 5 women, another one is the accountant, another one is the trainer, and they all do several things. So what we recommend to these organizations is that, yeah, we do that. You have a lot of activities, but they need to work on a structure. They need to specialize on a specific task. Maybe you're the one who have connections with the government, or someone that gives the training. You need to specialize, because financing requires a lot of time. You need to do power mapping. You need to know what doors to knock. In Fondo Semillas, we have built a vinculation policy, because I told you that there is a lot of risk in it. And we have a light philosophy, and we have a red light for those sectors that we don't want to get linked to. For instance, extractivism industries or porn industries, of course, we don't want those resources. Then we have yellow, those organizations that have to do with alcohol or processed food. They're not prohibited, but we need to sit down with them to see what type of relationship they want, and that needs to be approved by a committee. And then green organizations, those are the ones that are not yellow or red, but we also have to go through an ethical analysis to make sure that if they have good practices in terms of workers' rights, make sure that there's not a fraud scandal behind the organization. So we need to take the time as an organizations to talk about what type of resources we want, where we're going to be knocking on doors, work on their structure, and have someone that specializes to look for those funds.
Gracias por, I was going to start speaking Spanish. Thank you so much for that response. That you're even giving me ideas, as potential programming that we could work together to, support these leaders in their decision-making process, and what the red and yellow and green light means for each of these leaders and organizations. And so I know that we're at time now. I don't think we have time for one other question, but I do encourage the audience to write down some questions in the chat. We are going to follow up with a recording of today's call and share a whole bunch of resources on how you can take action, how you can join the cause of Fondo Semillas and the organizations that they're working to support, and also what ways that you can help move this conversation on philanthropy towards a more feminist centered approach. So we are going to be sharing some resources as a follow-up. And as I mentioned earlier, this series is a part of our Regenerative Agriculture and Health Accelerator. And like all our programs, we are focused on creating alliance building strategies that bring leaders together across territories to share strategies and learn from each other. And as you know, putting together public events and programs like this takes an immense amount of effort and resources. And I want to express my gratitude to our WIA team for everything it took to get these events together and to organize and to, invite and collaborate on. And I also want to recognize this is all made possible by support from our donors and funders and givers. So thank you so much for your support and for being here. And there's ways that you can join our Alliance efforts today by making a one-time donation to Women's Earth Alliance, join our seed bank of monthly donors. Coming up in this series, Ripple Week, we have a call tomorrow that we're very excited to host with Lila June on Indigenous Architecture of Abundance. And after that, we'll be hosting a call with Jamila Norman on the importance of creating an urban landscape of food abundance from her perspective as an urban farmer. So I'm very excited to continue on for Ripple Week. Thank you so much for being here. And to our speakers today, we appreciate your collaboration so deeply. And we hope to see you all at the next Ripple event.